The suns over Kaltheran 6 blazed like twin welding torches. The heat shimmered off the synthetic walkways of the Interplanetary Biological Exchange campus, warping the edges of reality in waves that made even the local fauna burrow deep underground. The air, thick and syrupy, hung heavy around every living thing unfortunate enough to be caught outside. And yet, through this furnace of a mid-cycle afternoon, a human jogged. Not walked. Not shuffled. Jogged. Marek Kinton's sneakers slapped rhythmically against the burn-resistant tiles. His shirt soaked through with sweat. His skin flushed a deep red that would have had any Kaltheran medical bot issuing immediate evacuation orders. He didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did but didn't care. From the shaded observation deck above the compound courtyard, 3 Kaltheran students stood frozen in disbelief. The tallest of them, Vortek, had his ocular nodes fully dilated, which for his species meant sheer alarm. "He's accelerating," Vortek said, turning to his companion, a shorter, blue-hued student named Pixa. "That doesn't track," Pixa replied, tilting its head. "The surface temperature is above acceptable tolerance for humanoids. He should be experiencing muscular degradation by now." "I think he's smiling," muttered the third one, a green-skinned academic intern named Rill, who had just joined the program 2 planetary cycles ago. "Is that amusement?" Below, Marek rounded the hydroponic garden, giving a small wave to a confused maintenance drone before continuing on his route. His breathing was heavy, but controlled. A bead of sweat dripped from his brow, blinked away like a minor inconvenience. He didn't even slow down as he passed the thermal warning signs blinking red across the walls. The aliens watched in stunned silence. Finally, Vortek turned from the window and activated the internal comms. "We need to report this to Instructor Halvax. He's exhibiting behavior inconsistent with known human biological limits." Marek, meanwhile, finished his 3rd lap around the compound and slowed to a brisk walk. He pulled the collar of his shirt away from his neck, exhaled audibly, and muttered, "That's more like it." He stepped inside the climate-controlled vestibule, where he was immediately greeted by a gust of chilled air and the startled gaze of a Kaltheran administrative bot. "You are operating with a core temperature exceeding safety thresholds," the bot stated flatly. "Yeah," Marek said, pulling a sweat-soaked towel from his waistband. "That's kind of the point. Heat training helps with endurance. Builds tolerance." He wiped his face, then leaned over to take a long pull from a water dispenser. "It's just light exercise, nothing crazy." The bot's processing lights flickered for a full 3 seconds before it responded, "This will be logged for review." By the time Marek reached the communal lounge, the Kaltheran students were already seated, speaking rapidly in their native frequency. Their translator devices lagged a few milliseconds as they struggled to keep up. Pixa looked up as Marek entered, still toweling off. "You were in the courtyard." "Yeah," Marek said, grabbing a chilled nutrient bar from the dispenser. "Had to get a quick run in." "You ran," Vortek said, "under dual solar exposure. That is not recommended for humans." "It's not recommended for anyone, probably," Marek said, tearing open the wrapper. "But I've run in worse." "In worse?" Rill asked, incredulous. "Yeah, I used to train in Death Valley back on Earth. Temperatures could hit well over 50 Celsius. And that was before sunrise." The 3 Kaltherans exchanged glances. "That's not a survival environment," Pixa said. Marek took a bite of the bar and chewed slowly. "Not supposed to be. That's the point." "Why?" Vortek asked. Marek shrugged. "To get better. You adapt. You push your limits." There was a long pause. Rill leaned forward. "Are you aware that your epidermal tissue is reddened to a degree that suggests early dermal trauma?" "You mean the sunburn?" "Yes. Yeah. Feels like a mild one. It'll pass." "We have medical gels," Pixa began. "It's fine," Marek said, waving a hand. "I've got aloe in my quarters." Vortek tapped his translator. We do not understand. You subjected yourself to a hostile environment, incurred minor injury, and consider it a good thing. Not a good thing, just part of the process. The Kaltherans sat in silence for a moment. Then Rill asked, and what is the process? Marek leaned back in his chair, tossing the empty wrapper into the disposal chute. Getting stronger. Later that evening, after the heat had died down, the Kaltheran students gathered with instructor Halvax in the research dome. The room was lined with hollow screens, each cycling through physiological data, atmospheric readings, and video footage of Marek's jog. Halvax folded its arms. This isn't the first time a human has exhibited unexpected endurance. But this particular instance is egregious. His heart rate remained elevated but stable, Vortek said. He never reached collapse threshold. He referred to it as light exercise, Pixa added, as if this was not even his maximum output. Halvax turned to the footage. We need to understand how this is possible. The next morning, Marek was in the training dome, running intervals on a curved treadmill. The Kaltherans watched from behind a transparent partition, whispering data into their slates. Rill tapped the glass. Marek, may we ask questions? Marek slowed to a walk and stepped off the treadmill. Sure. Why do you willingly endure discomfort? He grabbed a towel and wiped his face. Discomfort's temporary. You get used to it. Body adjusts. Is that your evolutionary design? Marek laughed. No. Most people avoid pain. But some of us train through it. Why? Because it makes you better at handling the real stuff. The stuff you don't choose. The Kaltherans exchanged glances again. Vortek stepped forward. Would you allow us to monitor your vitals during your next run? Marek hesitated, then nodded. As long as I get a copy of the data. I've got a training log I keep. 3 days later, Marek stood at the edge of the compound courtyard again. The heat was back, stronger than before. The Kaltherans had set up 4 observation drones and a mobile med unit just in case. Try not to pass out, Rill said. No promises, Marek replied, grinning faintly. He took off at a moderate pace, his body already slick with sweat by the second lap. The Kaltherans monitored everything: heart rate, oxygen saturation, thermal stress, muscle fatigue. By the 4th lap, Marek's pace slowed. His breathing grew shallow, his posture dipped slightly. He's reaching his limit, Pixa said. Should we intervene? Wait, Halvax said. Observe. Marek stumbled on the 6th lap. He stopped, hands on his knees, chest heaving. The medbot rolled forward, but Marek waved it off. He stood up, staggered a few meters toward the shade, then collapsed onto the ground with a heavy sigh. The Kaltherans rushed over. Marek. Rill knelt beside him. Are you injured? Just winded, Marek gasped, eyes closed. Maybe a little too much today. Pixa scanned him. Core temperature is elevated. Hydration low. You pushed beyond safe thresholds. Yeah, Marek said hoarsely. That was a dumb idea. Should have stopped after lap 4. You recognized the danger and continued anyway? Vortek asked. Marek cracked one eye open. Yeah. That's how you find the line. You could have collapsed, Rill said. I didn't. But you could have. Marek didn't answer. He closed both eyes again. They let him rest in the med bay for 3 hours. Fluids were administered. Coolant supplied. His heart rate stabilized. When he could sit up without dizziness, Halvax entered the room. You risked permanent damage, Halvax said. For endurance. I overestimated myself. Won't happen again. You say that with such ease. Marek looked up. It's not about ease? It's about knowing where the edge is. You confuse us, Marek Kinton. Yeah, he said, easing onto his feet. We confuse ourselves sometimes. That evening, the Kaltherans conducted a seminar on adaptive stress response. Marek was invited to speak. He stood at the front of the dome, dressed in a fresh uniform, a faint red peeling still visible on his neck from the sunburn. I'm not a superhuman, he began. I just train like this because I've learned that comfort doesn't prepare you for chaos. You can't predict what life throws at you. But you can prepare to be ready. Pixa raised a hand. Even if that preparation causes injury? Especially then. Because when it's real, when it's not a choice, you don't get to stop. There was silence. Then Rill asked, "And this is common among your species?" "No," Marek said, "but it's possible." Later, as they passed the courtyard again, Rill looked out across the now empty space. "Will you jog tomorrow?" Marek smiled faintly. "No, I think I'll rest." "Good," Rill said. "We were worried you were trying to impress us." Marek laughed, wincing slightly. "Not trying to impress. Just trying to keep my lungs working." They walked in silence for a moment. "You still think of it as light exercise?" Rill asked. "Maybe not light," Marek admitted, "but definitely worth it." On the observation deck, the heat sensors flashed red again. No one ran that day. But for the Kaltheran students, the memory of a human pushing himself through a furnace, calling it training, etched itself into their understanding of species resilience, and perhaps into their admiration. The next solar rotation brought a cold front, not cold by human standards, but cool enough that the compound's thermal regulators flicked into passive mode. The courtyard's haze diminished. The usual mirage shimmer was gone, replaced by a sharp clarity that made the compound's edges look almost artificial. Marek was in the Arboretum dome, lying flat on a padded bench with his legs elevated on a crate of nutrient packs. His left calf was taped, a faint purplish bruise visible under the translucent wrap. Beside him, a Kaltheran field medtech named Shai adjusted a scanning wand over his lower leg, making small clicks with its mouthplates as it read the results. "You strained the posterior group," Shai said, retracting the wand. "Microfibril tearing. Mild. Didn't feel so mild when I stepped off the treadmill this morning," Marek said without opening his eyes. "Because you did not stop after the warning pull. I thought it was just tight. Happens all the time after recovery days. Yet you increased your speed." "Yeah." Shai tilted its head. "That is not a sequence that aligns with healing." Marek cracked one eye open. "You're not wrong." From the other side of the dome, Rill approached, carrying a portable slate and a container of rehydration gel. "We reviewed your run logs from this morning. You reached near sprint velocity for the last interval." Marek groaned. "I was irritated. I had a weird sleep cycle last night. Figured I'd sweat it out." "That is not a known solution to poor sleep." "It is for me." Shai handed Rill the wand and began applying a cooling wrap to Marek's leg. The gel hissed faintly as it reacted with his skin. "You should remain immobile for at least 4 hours, Shai said. "Your muscle is in a repair cycle." Marek exhaled through his nose. "Can I stretch later?" "You may not." Rill sat on a nearby bench watching Marek closely. "You did not tell us your sleep patterns were irregular." "Didn't think it mattered." "It does if your cognitive function is impaired during physical exertion." "I wasn't impaired." "You ran on a leg that was already compromised." Marek turned his head to look at Rill. "Okay, fair." Rill tapped its slate once. "We calculated the strain ratio. You would have reached a tier threshold with just one more interval. Then I stopped at the right time." "No," Shai corrected. "You stopped because your leg gave out." Marek looked up at the dome ceiling, where artificial clouds drifted slowly across the projection. "I guess I've got a pattern." "An alarming one," Rill said. "You continue beyond optimal endpoints." "Because I don't trust the optimal endpoint." Shai paused. "Explain." "Those limits are based on averages. Norms. But people are different." "Bodies adapt." "Adaptation does not occur during injury," Shai said. "It does if you recover right." "You do not recover right," Rill said. "You run again before full restoration. Because too much rest makes everything tighten up again." Shai sealed the wrap and stepped back. "This cycle of strain and incomplete recovery will lead to cumulative damage." "Maybe. Or I'll just get used to it." Rill stood and approached the bench. "Why is getting used to pain a goal?" "It's not a goal. It's just part of the process." "We do not understand," Shai said. "You approach your body like a machine that must be overclocked." "That's not how I see it." "Then explain how you see it." Marek sat up slowly, careful not to flex his leg. Back on Earth, I worked in SAR search and rescue. Wildfires, earthquakes, mudslides. You don't get to wait until you're fully recovered if another call comes in. You go anyway. You were in danger? Constantly. And you endured physical damage? Often. Shai made a low clicking noise. That is not a sustainable model. It has to be. People need help whether I'm at 100% or not. Rill took a long moment to process this. That logic implies self-sacrifice as default. Only if you're the one trained to handle the situation. Shai retrieved a packet of electrolytes from a nearby dispenser and handed it to Marek. You are not currently in a crisis scenario. You are in a learning environment. Still feels like I'm training for one. Rill looked at the leg wrap, then back to Marek. What is the endpoint to this training? There isn't one. Shai stepped away to record the treatment log. Rill remained standing, arms folded, watching Marek drink the electrolyte gel. You know, Marek said after a beat, you're not the first ones to question this. We believe you. Most people back home don't understand it either. Rill glanced toward the entrance of the arboretum. Your physiology is not the issue. It is your relationship to discomfort. Marek raised his eyebrows. You think it's psychological? I think it's cultural. Shai returned with a diagnostic slate. We reviewed human literature. There is a pattern of glorified suffering mythologies, biographies, even entertainment shows where your species endures extremes voluntarily. Yeah, that sounds about right. Why? Marek scratched the back of his neck. I think it's because we don't trust things to be easy. If it's too easy, we assume it's not real. Even if it is? Especially then. Rill looked genuinely puzzled. Do you believe that pain confirms value? I think overcoming it does. A chime sounded from the dome's main terminal. The display lit up with a message from the central lab annex. The next biome assessment simulation was being activated. All interspecies participants were expected to report within 30 minutes. You're not cleared, Shai said immediately. I wasn't planning to skip. You are physically compromised. Then I'll adapt. No, Shai said, stepping in front of him. You will observe. From the gallery. Marek held up both hands. All right. Just watching. Rill followed him out of the dome. As they walked through the corridor, the overhead lights dimmed to simulate dusk. The air cooled another degree. Do you ever relax? Rill asked. Sometimes. Mostly by accident. That is not comforting. Marek smiled faintly. Then I guess I'm overdue. 3 hours later, the gallery overlooking the simulation chamber filled with a mix of Kaltheran researchers, xenophysiologists, and a handful of other students. Below, the chamber was set up to replicate an unstable terrain zone, shifting platforms, low oxygen pockets, and intermittent electromagnetic pulses meant to simulate atmospheric disruption. Marek leaned against the railing, legs stiff but manageable. Shai stood a few feet away, arms crossed. You do not like watching, Shai said. I prefer doing. That is not always the best way to learn. Maybe not, but it's how I retain things. Down below, a Kaltheran candidate slipped on a rotating surface and landed hard against a padded barrier. The simulation paused. Med drones moved in. Rill adjusted a focus lens and turned toward Marek. Would you have continued after that fall? If I could still move. What if you couldn't? Then I'd crawl. Shai let out a clicking sigh. You are not a benchmark. Never said I was. But your behavior is being noted. Some are beginning to question whether humans possess an inherent resistance to bodily failure. They don't. We just ignore the warnings more often. Why? Marek looked down at the paused simulation. Because we're not used to someone else saving us if we stop. Rill turned back to the chamber. That's a bleak calibration standard. Maybe, Marek said. But it's kept a lot of us alive. Outside, the twin suns had finally dipped low enough to cast long shadows across the compound. The heat was fading. But the impression of a species that ran toward pain instead of away from it lingered, etched not in data, or scans, or logs, but in the quiet tension of a man who couldn't sit still even when he should. Shy didn't say anything more. Rill just watched the chamber reset. And Marek, leg wrapped and stiff, still leaned forward ready to run again. Marek sat in the sand pit behind the Arboretum dome, legs crossed, both hands buried up to the wrists in the warm, grainy soil. It was early morning, an unhurried, golden haze kind of morning, and the Kaltheran students stood in a wide semicircle around him, all observing with the kind of wary attention usually reserved for hazardous specimens. The session had been scheduled as a cross-species resilience demonstration, though no one had expected it would begin with Marek voluntarily digging his hands into a pile of substrate meant for root filtration experiments. "He is not performing any measurable exercise," said Pixa, arms loosely folded. "He is sitting in dirt," Vortek added. Rill kneeled beside Marek, sniffed the air once, and tilted one of its ocular nodes. "This is a therapeutic practice?" "It's called grounding," Marek said without opening his eyes. "It helps reset the nervous system. You are absorbing microbial life through dermal contact," Pixa noted. "That seems inefficient." "Not the point." "Then what is?" Marek opened one eye. "Just being still. Letting the body settle." Vortex stepped forward carefully, as if the soil might react. "You claimed movement builds tolerance. Now you claim stillness does. They work together. You can't push constantly without pause." "This is not a pause," Rill said. "This is deliberate inaction." "Exactly." Pixa tapped its data slate. "You continue to challenge our understanding of stress recovery. Your actions contradict your previous behaviors." "Not contradict," Marek said. "Balance." Vortek crouched and touched the soil with the tip of one claw. "You believe this does something physical?" Marek pulled one hand out, flexed his fingers, and showed them the fine dust coating his skin. "It's not always about analysis. Sometimes it's just about stopping long enough to notice you're alive." The Kaltherans exchanged glances. None of them wrote anything down. For once, their recorders stayed idle. "I don't think we're getting a heart rate spike from this," Rill said. "Nope," Marek replied. "Not the goal." The silence stretched. The wind shifted. A few translucent leaves fluttered down from the synthetic canopy above. After 17 minutes, Marek stood, dusted off his palms, and rolled his shoulders. "All right, that's enough sitting in dirt for one day." "You consider this a success?" Pixa asked. "Yeah." My knee stopped twinging, and I didn't think about work once. "You have not been assigned tasks today." "I know. That's why it worked." They followed him back toward the main compound with hesitant steps, still visibly unsure whether they'd witnessed a ritual, a joke, or a medical procedure. By mid-afternoon, Marek was in the aquatic chamber, standing waist-deep in the chilled regeneration pool. His shirt was off, his torso bearing the faint yellowing marks of fading bruises. A soft hum pulsed beneath the water's surface, the low-frequency resonance designed to help with inflammation and joint recovery. He was the only human in the room. Shy entered from the side console, carrying a diagnostic tablet and a small, sealed packet of joint stabilizers. "You are voluntarily submerging in water below your preferred temperature range. Helps the joints. Takes the edge off. You have not received clearance for full aquatic immersion." "I'm not swimming. Just standing." Shy scanned his vitals anyway. "Your core temperature has dropped by nearly 1.5 degrees since entry. That is approaching mild hypothermia. I've got 10 more minutes before that happens." "You are counting?" "Always." Shy tapped the packet against its palm. "We have less invasive methods for recovery." "Yeah, but they don't work the same." "You mean they don't feel the same?" Marek grinned and ducked his head under the surface for a full count of 5, then came up gasping, shaking water from his hair. "You ever get punched in the thigh by a freezing ocean?" "It wakes you up in ways meds can't." Shy didn't respond immediately. It glanced at the water, then at the timer Marek had placed on the pool edge. You are not in pain currently? Nope. Just discomfort. Is there a distinction? Pain is the body saying stop now. Discomfort is it saying this sucks, but you'll live. Sci handed him the stabilizer packet. Your proprioception readings are within normal bounds. But your sleep cycle is still irregular. I'm working on it. You say that frequently. I'm still working on it. He stepped out of the pool, water dripping from his limbs, steam rising faintly as the room's ambient heat rebalanced. He dried off with a towel that had been warmed by a nearby panel and pulled on a dry shirt without urgency. Sci followed him to the locker area. There is an upcoming interspecies endurance trial, Sci said. You have not registered. I know. You were expected to. I've been expected to do a lot of things. Sci tilted its head. You no longer believe in testing yourself? Marek pulled on his boots. I believe in knowing when not to. You are declining to participate? I'm sitting this one out. For what reason? I want to see how you all handle it without comparing yourselves to me. Sci paused. So you believe your inclusion would skew the results? Not the results. The mindset. Sci considered this in silence as Marek stood fully, slinging his hydration pack over one shoulder. You give the impression of recklessness, Sci said. But your decisions are rarely uninformed. I like to keep things interesting. That is not a scientific method. Neither is instinct, Marek said. But it keeps us alive. Later that evening, the endurance trial began. The compound's outer field had been restructured into a sequence of terrain zones, magnetic resistance corridors, unstable surface paths, and low-visibility tunnels. The Kaltheran students stood at the starting point, fitted with neural feedback bands and motion sensors. Marek watched from the observation deck, arms crossed, sipping a high-calorie recovery drink. He didn't speak, didn't wave, just watched. Rill was the first to enter the magnetic corridor. Its stride short but steady. Pixa followed, adjusting their gait with every pulse of field resistance. Vortek hesitated before the incline zone, then proceeded with slow, deliberate steps. All three performed within expected parameters. No collapses, no spikes, no panic. After the final checkpoint, Sci approached Marek in the gallery. They completed the course without incident. I saw. They did not compete against each other. Good. They competed against their own thresholds. Marek nodded. Better. Sci studied him for a long moment. They did not try to surpass your records. That's the best outcome I could have hoped for. Why? Because now they're not trying to be me. They're trying to be themselves. Sci nodded once, slowly. You are not what we expected when we first studied human physiology. Humans rarely are. You are not only resilient, you are selectively reckless. That's probably the nicest way anyone's ever said that. Sci glanced toward the field where the others were cooling down with electrolyte mist and guided breathing. They will remember this. Not your heat run. Not your injuries. This. Good, Marek said. You will not train tomorrow? There's nothing left to prove. Outside, the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long, copper shadows across the compound. The air cooled just enough to carry breath on it. Marek remained in the gallery, silent, watching the Kaltherans laugh for what might have been the first time without looking over their shoulders at him. He didn't need to run today. They were moving forward on their own.